The year was 1871, and dawn came slow across the high plains, sliding pale and colorless over the low hills that guarded Elias Hart's land. The light wasn't warm. It wasn't gentle. It simply revealed things, the way the frontier always did, without kindness, without apology. Elias stepped out onto the porch with his rifle slung under one arm, the cold biting through his shirt, the boards creaking under his boots. He was 33, broad-shouldered, weather-worn, and already tired from a night spent listening to the wind gnaw at the shutters. He bent to check the water trough, then stopped. Completely. His breath hung in the air, a thin ghost of vapor drifting between him and the thing lying on the doorstep, a feather, long black and white. Apache. He didn't touch it, didn't breathe, just stared. No rancher in the territory mistook that kind of sign. No rider, no settler, no trader passing through these stretches of New Mexico territory would have dared pretend it meant nothing. A feather could be a warning, a mark, a claim, a message that someone had watched you without your knowing, a message that the watching wasn't over. Elias straightened slowly, scanning the wide, empty yard. The corral, the barn, the well, the frost-glazed fence line. Nothing moved, but that feather meant someone had been here while he slept. He swallowed hard. He had known peace on this land for nearly 5 years. Cattle grazed well enough. Water held steady. Neighbors were far but loyal. Trouble rarely came this far off the main trail. And yet, behind him, a soft cough drifted from inside the house. Mary, his younger sister, was 20, thin as a fence rail since sickness clung to her through the winter. She needed calm and warmth, and a brother not standing on the porch with fear climbing up his throat like a rising tide. Elias forced himself to breathe, then nudged the feather aside with his boot as gently as if it were a rattler's tail. He didn't want Mary to see it. She already worried enough. Another cough shook through the quiet. He turned, schooling his voice into something steady. "I'm fetching more wood," he called gently. "Stay warm." But when he stepped off the porch, he felt the weight of the open land pressing on his back, watching. Something was coming, maybe already here. He just didn't know what. By noon, the sky hung dull and flat, the kind that promised either wind or trouble. Elias kept his rifle close as he split logs by the barn, every echo of the axe ringing sharper than it should. Mary worked inside, humming faintly, unaware of the way he kept glancing toward the horizon, unaware of the tightness in his jaw, unaware of the thought repeating itself with cold insistence. The Apache didn't leave feathers for no reason. His father had spoken of it long ago, during the old border conflicts. Elias could almost hear him now, his gravel-bit voice, the warning in it. If a feather marks your door, boy, it means eyes are on you. Don't pretend you're alone. Don't fool yourself thinking you can hide. Elias had been 12 then. He was 33 now, but the memory still tasted like iron. He wiped sweat from his brow, forcing himself back to the rhythm of the axe. When a tremor passed through the stillness, the faintest thudding of distant hooves. He froze, turned, squinted against the low light. A rider was tearing across the plains toward his ranch. Fast, reckless, as if chased by the devil himself. Elias dropped the axe and grabbed his rifle. "Mary!" he shouted, rushing toward the house. "Stay inside." The rider came hard, swaying in the saddle, his horse frothing at the mouth. 50 yards. 30. 20. The man barely managed to haul the reins before sliding sideways, boots scraping the dirt as he toppled off entirely. Elias rushed forward, but kept the rifle ready. The stranger couldn't have been older than 28. Dark hair, clothes torn, blood streaked down his side. He gasped for breath, his eyes wild and unfocused. "Water," he croaked. Elias crouched beside him, lowering the rifle but not letting go. "Who's after you?" The man's gaze fixed on him with sudden clarity and fear. "Not after me," he rasped. "After you." Elias felt his pulse stumble. "Why?" The stranger groped at something hidden inside his coat. A small leather pouch fell from his shaking fingers. Keep it away from them," he whispered. "Don't let them think you had any part." "Part of what?" "Stealing it." Before Elias could speak again, the man's eyes rolled back. His chest rattled once, then went still. Mary's voice floated weakly from the porch. Elias? What happened? He stood slowly, staring down at the dead man, then at the pouch, then at the horizon behind him. Empty and silent and endless. Whatever the stranger had brought with him, it wasn't just trouble. It was death, and it was coming for Elias. He scooped up the pouch, feeling something hard and carved inside, and shoved it into his coat. Then he dragged the body to the shed, said a quick prayer, and scanned the ridges. The land answered with nothing but wind. Still, the hair on his arm stood up. Mary came down the steps, pale but curious. Elias, is someone coming? He didn't want to lie, but he couldn't tell her the truth, not yet. Someone might have been being chased. He said gently, but they're not anymore. Come inside. She searched his face with worried eyes. Are we in danger? He hesitated. Not if I can help it. But when he looked back at the horizon, he saw 3 faint figures perched on a distant ridge. Silent, motionless, watching. Apache scouts. His stomach turned cold. He tightened his grip on the rifle. Mary, he murmured, go inside now. The scouts didn't move, didn't shout, didn't signal. They simply watched him with the patience of stone. A warning, a promise, and a reckoning. The sun slid lower, draining what little warmth the land had left. Elias hauled barrels to block the windows while Mary lit 2 lanterns inside, her hands trembling despite the calm she tried to keep. He could feel her fear growing. She felt danger even if she didn't know its shape. He loaded rifles, checked ammunition, secured the stable. Every small noise outside made him tense. Each soft groan of the wind felt like a footfall. Every shifting shadow felt like someone watching. The feather on the porch wouldn't leave his mind. The stranger's warning wouldn't leave his chest. Something inside the pouch weighed on him like a stone. He hadn't dared open it yet. He told himself the moment wasn't right. But truth was, he feared what he might find. As he stood by the window, darkness pooling across the plains, he finally whispered, Why us? Why now? Mary, wrapped in a shawl, approached quietly. You're scared, she said softly. I haven't seen you scared since the fever took Ma. His jaw clenched. I'm not scared for me. For me then, she replied. He didn't deny it. She swallowed. Is someone after us? He hesitated long enough that she understood. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Apache? He nodded once. She closed her eyes. Because of the feather? He looked at her, surprised she had noticed. You weren't supposed to see that. I see everything you try to hide, she murmured. Why leave a feather if they wanted to attack? Elias exhaled, the truth burning like whiskey. Sometimes a feather means you've got something that belongs to them, or something they believe belongs to them. But we don't. He didn't answer. He couldn't, because he knew someone had brought something to their doorstep, something the Apache believed was here long before the dead stranger collapsed in their yard. A distant howl carried on the wind. Mary startled. Get some sleep? Elias whispered. I'll keep watch. She lingered. Elias, what if they're already close? He stared at the darkness until shapes seemed to move inside it. They are, he said quietly, and the last light vanished from the plains. The sun dipped low behind the distant ridges, draining warmth from the land and painting the plains in muted grays and dusky blues. Elias Hart, 33, crouched behind the barricade he had hastily assembled in front of the main windows. The rifle in his hands felt heavier now, weighted with dread and responsibility. Each splintered plank he had forced into place was a small promise. He would protect Mary, even if the land itself rose against him. Mary, 20, wrapped in a faded brown shawl over her simple cotton dress, moved carefully inside, carrying 2 oil lanterns. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying a fear she did her best to hide. She had grown up listening to Elias talk of survival and frontier justice, but nothing in the stories prepared her for this. The kind of terror that couldn't be reasoned with. The dusk made shadows stretch like dark fingers across the yard, and each one seemed to move with intent. Elias's eyes scanned the horizon where the ridge met the sky. Movement? Perhaps. Or just tricks of the fading light. His heartbeat thumped in his ears. Every sound, the creak of a shutter, the whine of a horse, the distant cry of a coyote, made him tense. He could feel the feathers' memory pressing against him like a warning whisper in the wind. They are coming. And now, as the air cooled and the first stars pricked the sky, he saw them. Torches glimmered along the distant tree line like floating sparks of anger and intent. He forced his shoulders down, keeping his hands steady. One moment, one mistake, and it could all be over. Mary whispered, "Elias, I see them." He didn't reply. He only nodded slightly, acknowledging the inevitability they had always feared. The wind picked up, carrying the faint but unmistakable sound of hooves striking dirt. The Apache were no longer scouts. They were approaching. Then came the first war cry, a sound sharp and chilling, echoing off the ridges and rolling across the plains. Elias tightened his grip on the rifle. He had read about raids in the newspapers, had heard tales of towns burned, families taken, lives ended in moments. But no tale prepared a man for the living weight of 20 warriors approaching with purpose, horses kicking up clouds of dust, the smell of sweat and leather and war paint carried on the wind. The riders spread in a loose semicircle, cutting off every possible escape. Torches reflected in the metal bits of their saddles, glinting like fiery eyes. At their head, the leader, Gray Hawk, rode tall and silent, face painted in black and white war stripes, hair braided with eagle feathers. His gaze, sharp and unwavering, fixed on Elias as though piercing his very thoughts. Elias lowered himself behind the wooden barricade. Mary pressed herself to the wall beside him, eyes wide, lips trembling. She clutched a small satchel she had carried since childhood, her most private treasures, now meaningless compared to the terror outside. A second feather, identical to the one found that morning, was tossed by a gray hawk onto the dirt. Elias recognized the meaning instantly. It was not a courtesy. It was a claim. They had come for the pouch. They had come for him. And if he resisted, there would be no mercy. Elias took a slow, deliberate breath. He stepped slightly forward, exposing only enough to show he meant no sudden hostility. His voice, steady but low, cut through the evening air. "I have what you seek. I do not know why it came to me, but I will not fight in less force." Gray Hawk's black eyes did not move. He signaled to one of the younger warriors, 19, barely into manhood, who raised a bow in tense anticipation. The message was clear: hand it over or blood would spill. Elias tightened his jaw. He couldn't surrender blindly. The pouch might hold a relic, yes, but what the Apache did not know, and what he must now protect at all costs, was the life of his sister. One wrong move, and she would pay the price. The wind whipped dust into his eyes, and he spat blood-tinged grit from his mouth. It would not be him alone facing this danger. A single arrow whistled past the porch, striking the side of the house with a loud crack. Panic sparked in Mary, but Elias dragged her down behind an overturned barrel. The war party was testing him, forcing a response. He fired once, and the young Apache warrior yelped, tumbling from his horse, uninjured but shaken. The night erupted into chaos. Windows shattered. Sparks flew from torches as they struck wood, and the air filled with acrid smoke when the small fires had begun at the edge of the yard. Elias kept his focus sharp, directing Mary to move quietly from cover to cover. Every shot he fired, every command he whispered, was a heartbeat and a rhythm of survival. "Stay low," he hissed. "Follow my lead." The war party circled, seeking the path of least resistance, while he led Mary to the back of the house where supplies were stored. Barrels, crates, and sacks formed temporary cover. He could hear their hooves crunching closer, see the shadows flickering in the torchlight. One wrong step, and the fire would claim them, or worse, the warriors would be upon them. Finally, he grabbed Mary's hand and whispered, "Now, we move." Through the smoke and dim torchlight, they slipped into a narrow gap between barn and fence. Elias could see the horses waiting, saddled and restless. He mounted first, pulling Mary up behind him. Her eyes met his, wide and fearful. He whispered, "We'll make it." The plains opened before them, dark and silent, the only light from the stars overhead, and the torches shrinking behind them. Horses leapt into motion, hooves pounding the dry earth, dust rising in clouds. Elias kept glancing back. The Apache were fast, but the terrain favored him now. Narrow ridges, gullies, and broken fence lines gave him a chance. Then came the river. Rain had swollen its banks in recent days. Water churned like liquid steel, cold and treacherous. Horses balked at the rushing current, nostrils flaring. Elias pressed forward, leaning into Mary, urging the animals with words and whip, heart hammering in his chest. A slip now would be fatal. Mary screamed as one horse stumbled, but Elias caught her mid-fall, muscles straining. They plunged through the icy water, dragged to the far bank by adrenaline and desperation. Behind them, torchlights still flickered, but they were no longer in open sight. The current, the darkness, and the broken terrain gave them cover. They collapsed behind a boulder on the far shore, water dripping from clothes and hair, hearts racing, lungs burning. Mary pressed against him, shivering. "Are we safe?" she whispered. Elias shook his head. "Not yet, but we're alive. That's the first victory." The pouch weighed heavily in his coat pocket. He hadn't dared look at it since the stranger died. He knew it was more than a bag of leather. And now, after this flight, it had become a symbol, a promise, a danger, and a debt he didn't fully understand. He pulled Mary closer, scanning the ridge for any movement. In the shadowed trees, he saw it, a figure, tall, carrying a bow, standing silent. The first sign that the fight was not over, not even close. And in that moment, as the stars blinked above the plains, Elias understood the truth of the feather and the pouch. Some things, once touched by the frontier, would never leave your life unscathed. The darkness pressed down as Elias and Mary crouched behind a jagged outcropping of rocks, horses trembling beside them. Across the shadowed clearing, a figure emerged. Lone Fawn, an Apache woman of striking presence, held her bow taut, arrow nocked, eyes sharp as flint. She was 28 tall, lean but powerful, her raven black hair braided with small feathers that caught the moonlight, skin sun-kissed and marked faintly with ceremonial paint. The firelight of the distant ridge shimmered on her leather leggings and fringed jacket, and every line of her posture spoke of readiness, skill, and danger. Elias, 33, rugged, brown hair, light stubble, gray shirt partially soaked from the river crossing, leather vest and pants scuffed from travel, raised his rifle cautiously, keeping Mary, 20, thin, pale, dark hair tied back, pressed close behind him. Mary's shawl was damp and clinging to her shoulders. Her eyes were wide with terror. Yet a quiet spark of trust in Elias anchored her courage. "Give me the pouch," Lone Fawn said, voice low but unwavering. "Return it, and we may end this without blood. Refuse, and your lives are forfeit." Elias exhaled slowly, knowing resistance was futile, but he didn't move immediately. His mind raced, calculating every possibility, weighing the lives of his sister and his own. This was not the enemy that had attacked the ranch. This was a test, a bridge, a choice forced upon him by someone who could read the truth in a man's soul. He realized the pouch was more than leather. It was a key, a symbol, and a danger all at once. "I didn't steal it," Elias said steadily. "It came to my doorstep with that feather. I don't know why, but I won't hand it over blindly." Lone Fawn's eyes narrowed, the arrow tip trembling ever so slightly. "The Apache believe it was taken. They will not see your claim as innocence, only as defiance." Mary whispered, almost to herself, "We have to do this or we're dead." Elias nodded. "I know." The tension stretched across the plains like taut wire, crackling with the promise of violence. Then, as if recognizing that a direct confrontation would serve no one, Lone Fawn stepped slightly aside, lowering her bow just enough. "Then we move together," she said. "We return it. But we must reach the war party before sunrise, or you will not survive their wrath." Elias's shoulders slumped in a mixture of relief and renewed anxiety. He glanced at Mary, whose face reflected both fear and tentative hope. They had no choice. Trust, fragile and dangerous, was the only path forward. The first steps of their alliance were tentative. Lone Fawn led, silent and sure, moving like a shadow among the rocks and brush. Elias followed with Mary behind, hearts pounding, ears straining for every sound. The plain stretched wide, open to the wind and the night, each step a negotiation with the elements and the unknown. They passed scrubby terrain, shallow gullies, and small cliffs that could hide or reveal them at any instant. The distant torchlight of the Apache war party lingered like a constant reminder of the stakes. Conversation was sparse. Each word carried weight. When Elias dared speak, it was a question about the pouch, its origin, its significance. Lone Fawn answered in measured tones, revealing that it contained a sacred medallion, stolen years ago by a white rider, the same rider who had died at his ranch. "It must be returned," she said, "before vengeance eclipses reason. My people will not forgive the theft." Elias swallowed, understanding that this was a test of character as much as courage. The medallion had been a catalyst of violence long before he had touched the land. Now, it demanded resolution, and he was caught in the middle. Mary shivered beside him. "Do you think they'll forgive us?" she asked. Her voice was barely a whisper, yet the fear and hope interlaced within it pierced him. He could only answer, "We haven't earned it." And with that, they moved deeper into the darkness, guided by Lone Fawn's unerring instincts. The terrain grew more treacherous as they approached a canyon carved by the river. Narrow trails, jagged rocks, and sudden drops tested their courage and the horses' endurance. Lone Fawn navigated with precision, pointing out loose rocks and sudden gullies. Every step was calculated. Every misstep could be fatal. Then came the predator. A mountain lion, eyes glinting, low and silent, leapt from the rocks, muscles coiled and ready. Horses reared, stamping and snorting while Mary screamed. Elias fired instantly, heart hammering, grazing the beast's flank, but continued its charge. Lone Fawn reacted with deadly grace, releasing an arrow that struck true, halting the animal's advance. The mountain lion bolted, wounded but alive, retreating into the shadows. Breathless, soaked, adrenaline pulsing, Elias and Mary clung to each other, grateful, awed, and shaken. Trust in Lone Fawn had become a lifeline. Without her, they might have already been prey. With her, they were not just surviving, they were moving toward resolution. At the first light of dawn, the trio reached the Apache encampment. Warriors surrounded them, silent, stoic, weapons in hand, painted faces reflecting war, history, and caution. The medallion glinted in Elias's hand, its carvings catching the early light, symbolizing the resolution that hung in the balance. Gray Hawk, 35, black and white war paint streaked across his face, braided hair adorned with eagle feathers, approached. His piercing eyes scanned Elias, Mary, and Lone Fawn, measuring, weighing, understanding. The surrounding warriors shifted, a low murmur among them, as they read the tension like a palpable current. Elias stepped forward, medallion held out. "This belongs to you," he said, voice steady but edged with weariness. "I found it, yes, but I never stole it. I only wish to return it and prevent more bloodshed." Gray Hawk's eyes flicked to Lone Fawn, who inclined her head subtly, then back to Elias. "Your words are true," he said, voice low and deliberate, "but actions must prove intent. Would you die for your sister?" Elias's answer was immediate, unwavering. "Yes," without hesitation. Gray Hawk studied him for a long, silent moment. The surrounding warriors shifted, tension coiling like a spring. Then, with a nod, Gray Hawk extended his hand, accepting the medallion. The immediate threat eased, but a lingering test remained. One of the younger warriors, 19, who had fired first at the ranch, stepped forward, anger burning his eyes, ready to challenge Elias. Gray Hawk raised a hand. "He chooses peace. We honor that." The young warrior froze, caught between duty and obedience, and finally lowered his weapon. Elias exhaled, tension draining from his body, muscles slackening as the impossible tightrope of survival gave way to fragile relief. Lone Fawn, standing beside him, let her bow relax. Elias glanced at Mary, who allowed herself a small, trembling smile. Relief washed over them, tempered by the understanding that the frontier's tests never truly end, but they had survived the immediate danger, and more importantly, they had acted with integrity, courage, and honor. Gray Hawk stepped closer, offering Elias a final gift, a feather, pure white, symbolizing peace and mutual respect. Elias accepted it with reverence, understanding that this moment was more than survival. It was a bridge between two worlds, a testament to the possibility of understanding and coexistence even amid the harshest landscapes and oldest conflicts. The warriors receded, disappearing back into the ridges, leaving Elias, Mary, and Lone Fawn standing on the high plains, the morning wind carrying the scent of sagebrush and promise. The medallion safely returned, the Apache satisfied. Elias finally allowed himself to feel a quiet, tentative hope, a fragile but undeniable triumph born from courage, cleverness, and trust. As the sun climbed, painting the sky with soft natural light, Elias looked over the plains that had been his home and battlefield. Mary's hand found his, squeezing tight. "We made it," she said softly. "Yes," he murmured, eyes tracing the ridges where the Apache had disappeared. "And we've learned something essential. The frontier isn't just a place of danger. It's a mirror, showing a man who he truly is when nothing else remains." Lone Fawn watched silently, a faint smile ghosting her lips. Her gaze held both respect and curiosity, an unspoken promise that their paths might cross again, perhaps as allies, perhaps as friends, but certainly as witnesses to the truths of this land and its people. The plains stretched endlessly beyond, silent yet alive, a testament to survival, courage, and the ever-present edge of uncertainty that defined the Wild West. And as the trio turned back toward the ranch, the wind carried the sound possibility, a quiet whisper across the grasslands that told them the story was far from over, but for now, they had endured, they had prevailed, and they had changed.